Welcome to Kingdoms in Conflict. I'm your host, Dr. Eric Wallace. In our society today, many of our communities are experiencing a lot of turmoil. And it's been said that Black Lives Matter has a false narrative that is competing against a narrative that is family-centered. But are these just competing narratives, or is one the truth and the other a lie? Has the Black Lives Matter movement hijacked the sentiment that Black Lives Matter to create something more insidious and nefarious? We will speak with the Honorable Ken Blackwell, the former Mayor of Cincinnati, also the former Treasurer and Secretary of State of Ohio, and a long list of other accomplishments I don't have time to list. We'll discuss this and more when we return.
Never before in America's history has there been a more desperate need for a unified voice to fight against the moral decay of our nation. Liberal progressives are pushing an agenda to destroy Judeo-Christian values, and mainstream media and other institutions are promoting the depravity of our nation. At Freedom's Journal Institute, we stand with those who are becoming marginalized simply because of their biblical faith and values. Like you, we are troubled by the racial and political unrest in our society. With the launch of our new online community, the Alliance of Freedom Fighters, we have risen to the challenge in the battle for life, liberty, and the pursuit of holiness. When you join our community, you will get access to FJI's digital libraries and information sharing portals, the ability to collaborate with other Alliance Freedom Fighters on both national and local community projects and issues, as well as needed support, encouragement, and best practices to champion our shared ideas and values. Go to allianceoffreedomfighters.com and become a part of the Alliance.
Welcome to Kingdoms in Conflict. I want to welcome my special guest, the Honorable Ken Blackwell. Ken, it's great to have you here.
Good to be with you.
But before we get into talking about politics, I want to ask you a question about how you got into politics. What was it that motivated you? What was it that got you involved? Was it faith-based? What was it?
Well, it starts with the family in which I was born. I had a great uncle. You might have heard of him, but most folks haven't. His name was D. Hart Hubbard. My uncle D. Hart was quite an athlete. And in 1924, he was to run against Eric Liddell of Chariots of Fire fame. And he had qualified for 3 events: the 100, the high hurdles, and the long jump. When he got to Paris after a transatlantic debate with Eric Liddell as to which one of them was the fastest human being on the face of the earth, he in fact was told that the 100 and the high hurdles were white-only events, and he couldn't compete. He then set the world record in the long jump. When he came home, he told my mom's generation that God had blessed him because he was able to witness Eric Liddell's courage and fidelity to his faith, that Eric could have put his faith to the side and run to worldly glory, but he didn't. He showed fidelity to his faith. And so my uncle and his generation, my mom's and dad's generation, that became sort of the watch phrase of our family: fidelity to faith. And so when you stop to think about the fact that the human condition is not a spectator sport, engaging in political life is a natural part of changing and improving the human condition. And so it was bred into me. And so it wasn't an option.
Okay.
That's how I got involved. And it started with neighborhood organization, and it went on up. I was very active in the community development corporation in our city, where we actually did organize around getting better schools, making sure that our streets were well maintained, and fighting to break down redlining. So that's how it was. That's how I got involved, and was blessed to be able to become mayor of my city.
As a former mayor of Cincinnati, what kind of advice would you be giving to, let's say, Lori Lightfoot here in Chicago and some of the other folks, other mayors that are having problems?
The first thing they ought to do is to stop using public safety as a political strategy. Public safety is not a political strategy, it's a leadership obligation. And one of the things that I came to understand very, very quickly about making sure that there's economic vitality and safe streets and good schools is that you have to have safety, safe environments. Because Eric, as you know, capital seeks the path of least resistance and greatest opportunity. And I was always fond of saying that capital is a coward. It doesn't rush to environments of violence and distress. And so one of the things that you find is that when you have cities that are riddled with crime and violence, and cities that have become killing fields, you see a flight of capital. And not only do you see a flight of capital, you see a flight of what I used to call net taxpayers, people who pay more in taxes than they demand in service. And when they leave, you start to see communities spiral down in terms of the quality of life. Those that remain are less mobile and they are of lower income. And as a consequence, there is a situation that is not conducive to forward movement and progress. And so I tell those mayors, make sure your streets and your neighborhoods are safe. You know, what you want to do is make your cities fields of dreams, you know, opportunity societies. And in order to do that, they have to first be safe.
Well, that brings up another question as you say that, because there's a lot of talk about equality and so forth, and wanting to, and one of the ways we bring about equality is bring more jobs and stuff, and they're also talking about this is how we, even before the riots and the marches, Chicago was having a problem with violence, and they say, well, we need to bring jobs and opportunity into the neighborhoods, but I would say, just listening to you, that a lot of that wouldn't happen, and correct me if I'm wrong, if you've got a high crime rate. I mean, who's going to bring their store into an
absolutely.
area?
You got it. That is the starting point. Look, if men and women were angels, you wouldn't need government. And so you do need government.
Right,
but you need minimum reaches of government into our lives. Look, I always start with the fact that the family is the incubator of liberty. When you have vibrant families and you have a shared sense of morality, you in fact need less government. But you do need a minimum level of government, because all of us are not angels, and you want those safety forces in place, well-trained, and able to diffuse situations in a variety of ways. But at the end of the day, you need them. And so that's, you're right, you got it. Public safety, safe neighborhoods, environments where you can raise families is important. And it starts with understanding the role of families in our two things. And it really does concern me about the Black Lives Matter Incorporated. They took an expression of human dignity and worth, and they hijacked it by making it part of an organization that is led by self-acclaimed Marxists. And a couple of things that we understand about Marxism. One, they destroy families because they don't want dependency on families. They want dependency on governments. And two, Marxist governments run God and faith out of the public square. So there is a direct attack. And these leaders, go to their website, are self-proclaimed Marxists. And they, in fact, on their website say that they have absolutely no use for the nuclear family as we know it. And so, one, I tell these mayors, if you want to go the Marxist way, continue to let families be destroyed. And once you let families be destroyed and you run faith out of the public square and you turn it over to anarchists and self-proclaimed atheists, you destroy America as we know it. We're not a perfect society or a perfect union, as Lincoln said, but we are perfectible. That means that we can get better, and that's so consistent with our Christian faith.
Well, right now it seems like Black Lives Matter has got the microphone. I mean, we've got people in sports. I mean, I know you're a former athlete. I know you and your wife are minority owners of the Cincinnati Reds. How do you feel about the social justice issues finding their way into the locker room and then also out on the field, from Colin Kaepernick to LeBron James?
Well, look, at the end of the day, no one surrenders their citizenship and their First Amendment rights once they become a part of Major League Sports. But I think an exercise of common sense and consistency is very important. When you begin to look at cities like Chicago, Detroit, Milwaukee, and you begin Cincinnati at times, you see the destruction of Black lives, not by police officers, but by other Blacks and a criminal element. I would think that LeBron James and those guys, consistent with their profound interest in protecting Black lives, would put their monies and their reputations on the line, fighting that sort of pandemic violence in those communities. That's an inconsistency that I find to be disturbing. And as a consequence, once you in fact have that sort of inconsistency, they need to be ready to accept the reactions of their fans and of their fellow citizens, because there is going to be a backlash and a reaction. Consistency and principle-driven behavior, I think, is first and foremost when people decide to engage in political expression through their profession.
Well, how do we change the narrative? Because the narrative out there has been, police are out there shooting Black people all the time, and that the violence in the streets is because of racism and inequality and all this. And we know, and you've already alluded to this already, that it's about the breakdown of the family. The breakdown of the family in many communities has caused a lot of these problems. I mean, Black men being shot by police. I heard one person talk about how, because they don't have a father in the home, they don't understand what it means to submit to authority. So how do we change that narrative? I know you've done some work with Family Research Council, and we just started a couple of years ago, Black Families Matter, as a cry against the whole Black Lives Matter, because we felt like if we're going to talk about Black lives, we need to talk about the family. And so I'm trying to figure out, okay, what is the solution? How do we change this narrative to, if you're MBA, if you're a scholar, if you're, whatever your profession is, how do we then move it back to try to fix the real problem, not this problem that the mainstream media and other people want to put out there that really is just a symptom of something else?
No, you're right. We have to stand for truth, and it's fascinating that sometimes we get into this discussion about competing narratives. The truth isn't a narrative. The truth is the truth, and I think that those of us who have microphones, those of us who have some presence on the public stage, we have to start speaking the truth. Look, I was one of the first to get out to say that we needed to make sure that there was immediate reaction and examination of the facts considering George Floyd's death and sort of summary execution in plain daylight. And believe me, the Justice Department, the apparatus in Minnesota, there was a coordinated law enforcement effort to get the facts in front of the public and to do a couple of other things. One, to establish that there was transparency. Two, to make sure that the officers were tried quickly and fairly. And I think to make sure that we had resources in place that actually brought into being alternative ways of apprehending folks. And so the Justice Department has done something that I think is very important. And that is they're going to start tracking bad actors, so they can't move from department to department or district to district or state to state, that they're flagged and they are weeded out. At the end of the day, if you begin to take a look at in raw numbers, the numbers of whites and the numbers of blacks killed by police officers, there are more whites killed by police officers than blacks. So then people want to get into, deaths per thousand as reflected in the population. Well, the reality is that all of those deaths that were wrongfully executed need to be dealt with. But the reality is that it is not a flood of black deaths at the hands of police officers. And that is where we have to start. We have to speak to the facts, and we have to speak the truth. And we can't cower. We can't be afraid to stand in the public square and tell the truth. That's the only way. Look, Martin Luther King said it in the mid-60s. He said, Americans have a choice, chaos or community. And Dr. Wallace, I would say that is the same choice that we have at this moment in the United States of America. As Americans, do we choose chaos or do we choose community? And community is based on real dialogue. Chaos, you have a lot of monologue and people talking past one another.
Some people are asking the question, why doesn't the president just, because they're trying to say that this is his America, and, as they go back and forth, the political thing. And the question is, people have acted as though the president can just call up the National Guard and send them wherever he wants to send them. You, as somebody who's been involved in policy and knows these things, kind of explain to our audience why he can or cannot do that.
One, in the classic sense of our federalism, we are a constitutional republic, and public safety at the local level is the responsibility of local governments and state governments. We don't have the heavy-handed authoritarian central government like they do in Russia, like they do in China. The fact of the matter is that we in fact have divisions and separations of power. And the president, through his Operation Legend, has essentially said, look, we are ready and willing to work cooperatively with state and local safety forces and authorities to make sure that we have the optimum resources on the spot to deal with high levels of destruction of property and the loss of life. And he's extended that invitation of folks at the local and state level to join Operation Legend, so we optimize the safety of our streets and our neighborhoods for our families, and most notably for our children.
Well, thank you so much. We're basically out of time, but I do want to say this. I forgot to mention in the beginning that Mr. Blackwell also happens to be on our advisory board, and he sends me articles from time to time for Freedom's Journal magazine. So I've known Mr. Blackwell, I forget how many years, but I appreciate what you do, and I appreciate your coming on. We will have you back, believe you me, to talk about a number of different issues. You have a long resume, and you can speak to a lot of different things. So thank you for joining us.
It's always good to be with you, Dr. Wallace. You are a force for good, and I like the fact that we have partnered up on a number of projects. God bless you.
All right, thank you, and we'll be right back.
Never before in America's history has there been a more desperate need for a unified voice to fight against the moral decay of our nation. Liberal progressives are pushing an agenda to destroy Judeo-Christian values, and mainstream media and other institutions are promoting the depravity of our nation. At Freedom's Journal Institute, we stand with those who are becoming marginalized simply because of their biblical faith and values. Like you, we are troubled by the racial and political unrest in our society. With the launch of our new online community, the Alliance of Freedom Fighters, we have risen to the challenge in the battle for life, liberty, and the pursuit of holiness. When you join our community, you will get access to FJI's digital libraries and information sharing portals, the ability to collaborate with other Alliance Freedom Fighters on both national and local community projects and issues, as well as needed support, encouragement, and best practices to champion our shared ideas and values. Go to allianceoffreedomfighters.com and become a part of the Alliance.
Welcome back. We live in a world in which it is difficult sometimes to distinguish the truth from a lie. The competing narratives are many times cloaked with half-truths. The idea that Black Lives Matter is a sentiment that only a few would take issue. However, the movement that has made this phrase popular has not told the truth. Police departments across the country are not hunting down Black people. The movement started to organize with the death of Trayvon Martin, who was killed by George Zimmerman, who was neither white nor a police officer in 2012. The shooting of Michael Brown was considered a justified shooting because Mr. Brown was fighting the police officer, Darren Wilson, in 2014. In 2019, statistics show that police shot only 9 unarmed Black men. Although any loss of life is tragic, the statistics show that Blacks being shot by the police is hardly an epidemic. However, what is more insidious is that Black Lives Matter statement of beliefs. They support a transgender lifestyle, especially trans women. They have a problem with cisgender people. That's people whose gender identity matches the sex assigned at birth. The leaders are trained Marxists with the mission to, quote, disrupt the Western prescribed nuclear family structure, end quote. These are just a few items of interest. Therefore, their whole mission is antithetical to the biblical prescription we've already seen in Genesis 1 and 2. God establishes male and female, marriage and children, the natural family, and it is good. But we learn in chapter 3 that in humans' rebellion, they wanted to establish for themselves what is good. Thus, looking for autonomy from God still exists today. Black Lives Matter and progressives are advocating for the destruction of the family, the very institution that God established for his purpose. As Ken Blackwell stated, that Black Lives Matter wants to destroy the family, and as Marxists, they will, quote, run God and faith out of the public square, end quote. But we know the consequences of broken families. Let me quote then Senator Barack Obama from his Father's Day speech on June 15th, 2008. Quote, of all the rocks upon which we build our lives, we are reminded today that family is the most important, and we are called to recognize and honor how critical every father is to that foundation. They are teachers and coaches. They are mentors and role models. They are examples of success and the men who constantly push us toward it. But if we are honest with ourselves, we'll admit that what too many fathers also are missing from too many lives in too many homes. They have abandoned their responsibilities, acting like boys instead of men, and the foundations of our family are weaker because of it. You and I know how true this is in the African American community. We know that more than half of all black children live in single-parent households, a number that has doubled since we were children. We know the statistics that children who grow up without a father are 5 times more likely to live in poverty and commit crime, 9 times more likely to drop out of schools, and 20 times more likely to end up in prison. They are more likely to have behavioral problems or run away from home or become teenage parents themselves. And the foundations of our community are weaker because of it, end quote. You see, families are an integral part of our society that helps bring order. Black Lives Matter and progressives have decided that they know better. They are like the serpent who challenged God's word and intent in the garden. The serpent whispers in their ears that God is holding something back from you. You can change your gender. Sex relations should not be relegated to marriage. And there's nothing wrong with the LGBT community. It's all about loving who you want to love, because God is love, right? You see, they have called evil good and good evil. In Isaiah chapter 5, the prophet receives an oracle of judgment against Israel. Among the litany of grievances in verses 20 through 21, quote, "Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. Woe to those who are wise in their own eyes and shrewd in their own sight," end quote. And like the first couple who rebelled, their quest for wisdom determined the good for themselves, this quest will also lead in tragedy. Paul in Galatians chapter 5:16 warns Christians to walk in the Spirit when he says, "But I say walk in the Spirit, and you shall not gratify the desires of the flesh," end quote. He then lists the works of the flesh in verse 19 through 21. Quote, "These are the works of the flesh are evident: sexual immorality, impurity, sensuality, idolatry, sorcery, enmity, strife, jealousy, fits of anger, rivalries, dissensions, divisions, envy, drunkenness, orgies, and things like these. I warn you, as I warned you before, that those who do such things will not inherit the kingdom of God," end quote. He warns the church in Galatia one more time in chapter 6, verses 7 through 8, quote, "Do not be deceived, for God is not mocked. For whatever one sows, that he also will reap. For the one who sows to his own flesh will from the flesh reap corruption, but the one who sows to the Spirit will from the Spirit reap eternal life," end quote. See, God's word is true. Only God can establish what is good, and he has done so. Therefore, Ken Blackwell was right. We need to, quote, "tell the truth," end quote, despite some who call competing narratives and are not afraid of the consequences for speaking the truth. God established the family. Therefore, black families should be encouraged and protected because black families matter. Until next time, God bless you.